Welcome back to Self-Invested, where we talk about how you can do better with money. In this video, I'm going to be comparing freehold properties to leasehold properties. Just so you know what I'm covering in the video, I'm going to list the topics on screen now with some timestamps against them. If you're rewatching this video and you want to go back to a specific topic that I discussed, then just have a look down in the description and you'll find the timestamps there. Before we get into this video, I just want to say that there isn't really a competition between freehold properties and leasehold properties. If you have the option of both, then you're better off going for a freehold property. I can't really think of any situations where you'll be better off going for a leasehold property. This isn't a debate or a competition like you have with a new build property versus an existing property, where there will be arguments for both. I think when it comes to freehold and leasehold, if you have the option of freehold, then you're more likely than not going to be better off with the freehold property. But in this video, I'm just going to be exploring the differences, explaining what a freehold property is and what a leasehold property is, so you have a better understanding of the differences. Well, a leasehold property is a property that you buy the right to live in for a certain period of time. Now, that certain period of time is usually known as the lease length or the term of the lease. The initial lease of most leases is either 99 years or 125 years. Although we are seeing changes in the industry, and we're going to see leases with 250 years and 999 years coming onto the market very soon. I'm going to be talking about that more in my next video. Once the property gets to the end of the lease term, so once the 99 years are up or the 125 years are up, the property that you bought then goes back to the freeholder, who is the person that owns the building that your flat or your leasehold property is in and the land that the building is on. So that just shows you, with a leasehold property, you're not actually technically buying it outright. It's almost like a hired purchase. You're paying money up front to live there for a fixed period of time. Once that period of time has passed, you then have to give the property back to the freeholder. Now, most flats in England are sold as leasehold properties, although you can buy flats where they're sold with a share of the freehold. And I'm going to talk about that more later in this video. Well, a freehold property is where you buy a building outright and the land it's on. You don't have a landlord or anyone that you have to pay rent to. You own that property and you can do what you want with it as long as you get the correct approval. Now, most houses in the UK are sold as freehold properties. However, there are some houses that are sold as leasehold. And if you come across any of these type of properties, then the best thing to do is to avoid them. The government's actually promised to stop the sale or stop the building of houses that are sold as leasehold properties, because the industry or people have been protesting against them and think that they're very unfair. And it doesn't really make sense to have a house that's freehold, because a house is a standalone building and it sits on its own piece of land. So there's no reason that a house should be a leasehold property. So if you do come across them, then I don't think you should entertain the idea of buying one. So now I'm going to talk about the problems with leasehold properties, and I'm going to concentrate on 6 problems that I've identified with leaseholds. Now, the first issue I want to discuss with leasehold properties is ground rent. Now, there are a number of issues with ground rent, which I'm going to try and touch on as best I can in this video. I might need to do a completely separate video about ground rent to go over all of the issues, but I'm going to try and just summarize them in this video so you've got a good idea of some of the issues with ground rent. As discussed, ground rent is an amount that you pay to the freeholder for having a property which is situated on land that they own. Now, usually it's not a lot. It can range between £125 a year to £1,000 a year, but it usually does increase over time. Now, the more it increases over time, the quicker it increases over the time, the more expensive it will be to extend the lease if you try and do that in the future. And I'm going to talk about that later in the video when I talk about lease enfranchisement. But the key thing to know is that the more and the quicker it increases over time, the more expensive it's going to be to increase your lease. Now, another issue with ground rent, which I wasn't aware of until I started doing research for this video, and is actually similar to an issue with shared ownership properties, is that because you're paying rent to the freeholder, if you fall behind in your rent, then there's a chance that the freeholder will have the ability to repossess your property because you've failed to pay them rent, which is a term of your lease. So you're basically breaching the terms of your lease. Now, for that reason, the freeholder will have some powers or some ability to reclaim your property. Now, I haven't seen any stories where this has been done, but in the article that I read, I'll link to it in the description. It was by a solicitor's firm called Thompson, Snell and Passmore. They say that because you're paying rent to the freeholder, if you were to fail to pay your rent to that freeholder, then the freeholder will have rights to your property because you breached the terms of your lease. So that's an important thing to remember and something to avoid doing if you can. Now, the second issue with leasehold properties is that you have to pay a service charge for communal areas and for the general building. So a service charge is an amount that you pay to a management company who maintains your hallways, your lifts, all of your communal areas. Now, in all honesty, service charge isn't unique to leasehold properties. If you own a new build freehold property that's part of an estate, or if you're in freehold property that's part of an estate where it has private communal areas such as gardens, then it's likely that you'll have to pay service charge as well. But with leasehold properties or leasehold flats, because there's going to be more shared areas, there's going to be more shared building, more shared hallways, the service charge is going to be higher or is likely to be higher for a flat or a leasehold property than it will for a freehold house. Another problem with this is that because it's usually managed by a separate company, it's not usually managed by the tenants or the leaseholders, although you do actually have the right under certain terms to take control of the management of your building. That's something I'll touch on in a separate video. But in most cases, it's managed by a separate company to the leaseholders, and they're the people that set the price, will tell you how much you're supposed to be paying, and you don't have control over the amount that they charge you. The third issue with leasehold properties is that your lease is diminishing, it's reducing over time. Even if you start with a 99-year lease, after 10 years, that lease is going to be 89 years, and it's going to continue to decrease until you either extend the period of your lease or it goes down to zero and you hand the property back to the freeholder. With a freehold property, you own the property outright and there's no expiration date on your ownership of that property. Now, the fourth issue I want to mention about leasehold properties is to do with historical issues or historical problems with communal areas or the building that you buy a property in. Say you were to buy a flat in an existing building, and there were some pre-existing issues with the roof of that building before you bought the property, then you would be responsible for the repair of those historical issues. Now, this is why it's important, if you're buying an existing leasehold property, that you get a good survey done, and that survey covers all of the communal areas, the roofs, all the shared areas that you're responsible for as a leaseholder, to make sure you know what the condition of every area of that building is, so you're not hit with any surprises when you buy that property. Now, the fifth issue I want to discuss is to do with alterations. Now, depending on the terms in your lease, you may need the permission of your freeholder before you can make any major changes to the internal parts of your building. So say, for instance, you wanted to replace your carpet with hardwood flooring, then there are certain leases where you have to get permission from the freeholder to be able to make a change like that. So it's important, again, that you read your lease and you make sure you understand what you can and can't do. And if you're unsure about anything, you get advice on it. The sixth and last issue I want to mention about freehold, or about leasehold properties, is that there's sometimes restrictions on what you can and can't do with your property. Now, there are certain leases where it says you can't own pets or have pets in your flat, or you need to get permission. And also, you may have terms in your lease that say you can't sublet. Now, to be honest, these are very rare issues, but it's important that you check your lease and you get advice from your solicitor when you're buying a property to make sure that this isn't going to cause you a problem in the future if you wanted to have pets, or if you decided that you wanted to sublet your flat in the future. Now, there are two things that can be done to improve the terms of your leasehold agreement. Both come under a process known as lease enfranchisement. The first thing you can do is known as a statutory lease extension. Now, this is where you increase the term of your lease by 90 years. So say you had 80 years left on your lease, you would extend it by 90 years, taking it up to 170 years. But also, it reduces your ground rent to a peppercorn rate, which essentially means zero. You won't have to pay any ground rent. To be eligible to do this, you need to have owned your property for 2 years. If you're buying a property from somebody who has lived in that flat for at least 2 years, you can actually get them to start the process for you and then hand over the right or the benefit to use the statutory lease extension to extend your lease when you buy that property. You can also try, as part of the sale of that property, to get that leaseholder or the existing leaseholder that you're buying the property from to extend the lease before you actually buy it. But failing that, you can actually get them to start the process and then hand over the right to use to extend the lease using the statutory lease extension without having to wait another 2 years before you could do that. The important thing to remember with a statutory lease extension, however, is that if the lease falls below 80 years, then it becomes a lot more expensive to increase the length of your lease. Now, this is because of something called marriage value, which you have to pay on your lease when it drops below 80 years. If you're going to be buying a leasehold property, you want to make sure that after 2 years of being in that property, you're still going to have 80 years left on that lease. Because if you have less than 80 years, then it's going to be a lot more expensive to increase the length of that lease. If you want to find out more about the statutory lease extension process, then you can check out a video that I made on it. I'll provide a link down in the description, but also above my head in the I button. And that video goes into a lot more detail about the lease, the statutory lease extension process. So the second option is where you collectively, with the other leaseholders in your building, buy the freehold to your building. Now, this is an ideal solution. This is even better than the lease extension solution, because you are taking the freeholder completely out of the picture, and you're not only extending your lease, you're buying the freehold. So there is no end date, there's no fixed term on when you own that period. You basically own it forever. You own it outright. In order to do this, you need at least 50% of the leaseholders to participate in buying the whole building. And you need to pay for 100% of that building. So even if only 50% of you were taking part in buying the freehold, you would have to pay for the freehold for 100% of the building. Also, no more than 25% of the building can be used for non-residential use. So if your flat is above a shop and the shop is 50% of the building and flats make up 50% of the building, you won't be able to do this. Any non-residential use of the building that your flat is in needs to be less, or needs to be 25% or less. At the time of recording this video, I haven't made a video on the process of buying a freehold of a leasehold property, but I will be making a video to it. And if you're watching this video sometime in the future, then I'll provide a link once I've made that video down in the description to this video. So yeah, have a look down in the description to this video to see if I've made a video to it. The next thing I want to discuss in this video is the difference in value between an identical property where one is a freehold property and one is a leasehold property. After discussing the differences between a freehold property and a leasehold property, you probably think there's a great value difference between owning a freehold or share of a freehold for a flat and owning a leasehold, because with a leasehold it's essentially a hired purchase. You only own that property for a fixed period of time, but with the freehold you own that property outright. So I don't think you'll be wrong in thinking that the freehold is going to cost a lot more than the leasehold. But according to the Money Saving Expert website, surveyors for KFH estimate that freehold properties are only 1% more valuable than leasehold properties that have a long lease. So say, for instance, there were two flats which were identical, but one was freehold and the other was leasehold, and the leasehold one was worth £300,000. The freehold property would only be 1% more, so it would only be £303,000 more. Now, I think that's not a great difference in value, and you would be much better off paying that £3,000 to get the freehold property, so you don't have to worry about any issues with a freeholder, and you know that you own that property outright, or at least collectively you own the building and the land that it's on. So the first thing I'll say is stay away from leasehold properties if you can. If you're buying a flat, look for a flat where you own a share of the freehold, because they do exist. You'll be much better off with a share of the freehold than you will with an ordinary leasehold property. So that's the first takeaway. However, if you're going for an existing leasehold property, then I think the best thing to do is look for a property where the lease has already been extended through the statutory route. So that's where the lease has been extended by 90 years. So it's going to be over 100 and let's say 60 years. And the ground rent is going to be a peppercorn rent. That's going to be the best type of leasehold property that you're going to get, because you're not going to have to worry about extending the lease again, and you're not going to have to pay any ground rent or worry about the cost of ground rent. If you go for a new build property, then make sure you go for one of the new build properties where they're granting 250-year leases or 999-year leases, and there's no ground rent to pay, because that's something that's currently changing in the industry. If you're looking at a new build property now, or you're going to buy one in the very near future, then it may be worthwhile holding off and looking for a property with a very long lease and where you don't have to pay any ground rent, because that's going to make a major difference to the affordability of that property and the resale value of that property. That's something that you're going to have to factor in. How difficult is it going to be for you to sell that property after you bought it? It's something I spoke to a mortgage broker about. I'll provide a link above my head and also in the description, where one of the key bits of advice he gave to first-time buyers was think about how easy it will be to sell your property in the future, because it's all well and good, you know, when you buy that property, it being nice and you liking it in that first instance, but you have to think about how saleable that property is when you want to move up the property ladder. That brings us to the end of this video. Please let me know what you thought about that video. Did you learn anything new? Was there anything I didn't cover? Please let me know down in the comments. Also, do you like this new setup? I've used my phone to record this. I've tried to do it slightly different because the focus is better on my phone. I had an old camera, it was about 10 years old, and it was like one of those small SLRs, but it wasn't very good at focusing when it came to recording. So I'm trying to improve the quality, the production quality of my videos, and I thought I'd give my phone a try. Please let me know down in the description whether you like it. If you do, if you like this video and the information that I've given, then please give the video a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do. And I'll catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye.